All right, let's continue with this solve for x section. This is the longest section in the whole packet. So hopefully it'll be the only one that has to be split up like this so much. But let's go. So this is the same as so many that we've done. They tell us that x is 2/3 y, and then they tell us what y is. So we can find what x is by just plugging in what y is, 2/3 times 18. And now, remember, don't do 2 times 18. That's just going to make your life harder. Cancel first. 18 divided by 3 is 6. So x is 12. So 2 times 12 minus 3 is 21. Beautiful. Next. Well, don't get freaked out by the square roots. Remember, of course, you cannot just do this. That is not legal to get rid of the square roots. You would have to distribute on the left. So you could do that if you needed to. But no, it's the square root of 9. That's 3. It's the square root of 64. That's 8. This is just the square root of x equals 3 plus 8. So it's the square root of x equals 5. So then you can square both sides, and x is 25. Beautiful. Next, what value of t? So solve for t. And so we got fractions. When we got fractions, I'm always thinking I'm always thinking cross multiply. But in reality here, this is something Mr. Wong taught me. You don't need to multiply by the 2, because then you're just going to divide by the 2. That's just a waste of time. It's not that much of a waste of time, but it is a little bit. So really what you want to do is just multiply by 3, 15, and divide by 2, which means multiplying by 1/2. So that 2 goes on the bottom. It's 4. And that's just the answer, 15 over 4. You just multiply by 3 and divide by 2. All right, down here, what is the sum of the solutions? So we got the trick for the sum of the solutions, but we don't need it here because we can so simply just get the solutions. 6 and negative 0.7. So what do we get when we add 6 and negative 0.7 together? 5.3. All right, up here, what value of x satisfies the equation? Well, you just got to distribute and just got to combine like terms. So we distribute the 2 and distribute the negative. Make sure you're always looking for those distribute the negatives, because that's just a common mistake that people are going to make. So you've always got to be watching out for it. So then you get this, and yeah, now we just combine like terms, 2x, add the 40 and the 15 to the other side. So let's see, that's negative 55, so plus 55. So 7 plus 55 is 62, and then divide by 2. So x is 31. Beautiful. I mean, that's a suspicious answer, but no, that's beautiful. Next, in the xy plane, the graph y equals 3x squared minus 14x intersects y equals x at those points. So find those points. So, I guess this is more of a system of equations type of thing. Anytime I see two graphs, that's always like a system of equations type of idea. And so you use like those ideas. In this case, substitution. I would say if we know that y equals x and y equals that, we should set those equal to each other and say that x equals 3x squared minus 14x. And then from there, now we just solve for x. So this is a quadratic. Remember, anytime you have a quadratic, that means you should set it equal to 0. So subtract the x to the other side. And then like factor and stuff. So what can you factor here? Well, I would factor out a 3x, because that's the biggest thing we can factor out. That leaves us with x minus 5. And so now you got two things multiplied together to be 0. So either 3x equals 0 or x minus 5 equals 0. And that gets us our two solutions, 0 and 5. And look how we already had the 0 solution. But now we know the other solution is 5. So A is 5. All right, so that equation is graphed in the xy plane. What is the x-coordinate of the x-intercept? How do you find an x-intercept? Well, remember, x-intercept, that's like here. What's the y value? The y value of an x-intercept is always 0. So to find the x-intercept, we're just going to put y in, put 0 in for y, and get 4/5 x equals 1. So that means x equals 5/4. That's our answer. This one's fun. They tell us that 2x plus 8 equals 16. What is x plus 4? So, of course, we could solve for x. But look, all we need to do is divide everything by 2. And that gets us that x plus 4 is 8. Beautiful. Got to take advantage of those quick ones when you can. All right, so on to the next page. This equation, a is a constant. If x is negative 3 is one solution, what is one possible value of a? Okay, well, I just plug that in and solve for a. That's fine. So x is negative 3, so that means negative 3a plus 3 squared equals 36. All right, that's good. So how do we solve for a here? Well, we'd square root both sides. And notice that that's why they're talking about possible values of a. Because when we square root both sides, don't forget, we always need plus or minus. So we're going to have the square root of 36, so positive 6, or negative 6. And now we just solve for a. So we'll get our two solutions. So subtract 3, divide by negative 3. We get that a equals negative 1. Subtract 3, divide by negative 3. We get that a equals 3. So those are the two solutions. We just pick the one that's there. C. Beautiful. This one's silly. They're just trying to get you to combine like terms. So how many x's do we have over here? 3 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1. So that's 6x. And then negative 3 minus 2, negative 5, is 7 plus 2x's. So there we go. Combine like terms. Move the 2x over, move the 5 over. 4x is 12. X is 3. Boom. Here we go. Here's another one where my tip is don't solve it. Just plug in the answers. So I see this is the biggest thing. So I would check 0 first just because it's easy. You get the square root of 6. And then if you get the square root of 6, nothing else is going to work out because the square root of 6 ain't going to go away. So 0 is no good. Let's cross that one out. Next, I'd probably try 5 because it seems easier just because it's positive. So what happens when you plug in 5? 2 times 5 is 10, plus 6 is 16. The square root of that is 4. Plus 4 equals 5 plus 3. Okay, so 5 works. So I bet just because how they write these, the negative 1 is not going to work. But let's see. 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. Plus 6 is 4. Square root of 4 is 2. Plus 4. Is that equal to negative 1 plus 3? No, it is not. So negative 1 is no good. That means the answer is just 5. And that's usually how they do that only one of the answer works. That if we actually solved for this like normal, we'd probably get negative 1 and 5. But with the square roots, you've always got to plug in the answers anyway to check if they work. And negative 1 didn't work. All right, so here we just got to solve for x. Notice they do that sometimes. Normally I just ignore these. That's pretty much what you do. You either ignore them or just treat them as last to pick which answer you're going to do. So we're just going to solve for x. So we got to factor this. So multiplies to negative 12 and combines to be x. Positive 1. So that's x plus 4, x minus 3. And there's our two solutions then. Negative 4, positive 3. And so now to choose which one you're going to pick, well, it just says that a has to be greater than 0. So you pick the positive one. And anyway, when on these fill in the blank questions, they can't be negative because there's not a negative. You can't grid in a negative if you're taking it on paper. If you take it on the computer, it can be negative. But most people are still taking the SAT on paper. All right, 8. This one's fun because you can either solve for x and then find what x plus 1 is. But that's a massive waste of time because look at what you can do here. If you multiply both sides by x plus 1, you get x plus 1 squared equals 2. And now you can just square root both sides. So you get that x plus 1 is positive or negative the square root of 2. And we don't even care what x is because all we want is x plus 1. We have that, either positive root 2 or negative root 2. And they put positive root 2. Nice. All right, this one. So notice they give us the formula. If they have us doing some crazy shape, they're going to give us the formula. And they just want to know what the value of k is. So, and then they tell us the volume. They tell us the volume is 473. So we're just going to do that. We're just going to say that 473 is 7 pi k squared over 48. And this is definitely a calculator problem. So we're not going to try to think too much. We're just going to multiply by 48 and then divide by 7 pi. And then we'll just whip out the calculator and do it. So we could simplify the 48 and the 7, but if we're doing it in the calculator, there's no need, really. Just divide it by 7 pi. And that's not our answer. Let's not make that mistake. Luckily, they were kind and didn't even put that as an option, because that equals k squared. So then we have to square root that. Square root the answer. And we see that it's 32, but that's also not an option. So let's see what we did wrong. Because it's not squared, it's cubed. We didn't pay attention to the formula, and that makes sense. It's volume. You expect things to be cubed. So that means we need to come up here to the answer, and we need to cube root it. And here's just a pro tip. It's just kind of obnoxious to go find the cube root. So remember, you can always do cube roots as fractions. So raise that to the 1/3 power, and you get your answer. D. Beautiful. So we were just getting that wrong. We're trying to go too fast. We wrote this wrong. That should have been cubed. That was the problem. All right, let's keep going. What value of x satisfies this? Well, this is straightforward. I mean, personally, I would divide by 3 first, just because why not? Of course, I did it wrong, so maybe that's not the move. But then just subtract 1 and you get 8. And of course, you could not do that. You could go 3x equals 24, and then divide by 3 and get x equals 8. Either way, that's an easy problem. This is also pretty easy. Again, this is kind of cool because we don't need to solve for n. We should cross multiply, or multiply both sides by 5, to get the 2n equals 50. And then what do we want? 2n minus 1. So we should just subtract 1 from both sides. So 2n minus 1 is 49. That's a repeat. This was made by a human, so there's mistakes. If x equals 1 in the equation above, what is the value of a? Well, it's just one of those again. We just plug in 1, and then we're going to solve for a. So how would I solve for a? I would add that 1/2 a to the other side, and then you just got to multiply by 2 to cancel out the 1/2. So a equals 2. Which of the following represents all possible values of x that satisfy the equation? Well, yeah, I would plug in. So I would say, first off, 0. Does 0 work? Yeah, 0 definitely works, because 0 divided by anything is 0. So we know that 0 needs to be in there. And now it's just deciding between 2 and 4. And I would try 4 first, just looking at all the answer choices. Let's say what happens when we plug in 4. Well, on this side, we just get 4. 4 over 1. On this side, the 2's just cancel anyway, so that's just 4. So 4 definitely works, so it has to be 0 and 4. Anytime they give you solutions like this, when such a small number, I really think it's easier to plug in. Because, like, you could definitely, I mean, it wouldn't be too hard to solve. Because we'd have x over x minus 3 equals x. We'd cross multiply, so x is x squared minus 3x. And then you'd subtract x, so you could have it equal to 0. So then you could factor an x out, and that's how you get your two solutions. But it's probably quicker and it requires less thinking and just works every time to just plug in the answer choices. Start with 0 because it's the easiest, and then 4 because it comes up the other times. All right, that's another repeat. That one was 49. This feels like a repeat just because they're so repetitive, but I don't think it is. You see how they give us 4x plus 2? We want 2x plus 1. So we just did this technique. It was a different problem, but we just did this technique. Divide everything by 2. You get 2x plus 1 equals 2. All right, good stuff. We are flying through these now. Graph of the x function has 2x intercepts. What is the distance between the 2x intercepts? So there's probably quick ways we could just jump to this. But I would just find your x-intercept. How do you find an x-intercept? You set the y equal to 0. You set this whole equation equal to 0. Because then you just factor, multiplies to 4, adds to 5. Obviously 4 and 1. And then you get your two solutions, negative 4, negative 1. What is the distance between those two solutions? 3. Yeah, so maybe there's not a good option to do that quickly. You actually have to do it. But that's super easy to do it. You find your x-intercepts, negative 1, negative 4. The distance between those is 3. Wow, my microphone was in a weird position. Anyway, so on to the next page. A manufacturer shipped units of a certain product to 2 locations, yada, yada, yada. total shipping cost was 47,000. So let's see, total, that's definitely T. And 3,000 units were done to the farther location. So that's going to be the F. It tells us that right here too. So it's one of those we just got to plug in and solve. So the total was 47,000. We don't know how many close ones there were, but there were 3,000 far ones. So 12 times 3,000, 36,000. Subtract that to the other side. 11,000 equals 5C. Is that correct? Let's see. 47,000, 3,000, 12 times 3,000 is 36,000. So it's 11,000 equals 5C. And then we divide by 5. Right, so 11,000 divided by 5. Remember, I always do this technique. So then we cross out one of the zeros, and we get 2,200 close packages. So yeah, I was worried the number was going to be too big, because that's kind of another tip on these answer choices, on these fill in the blanks. You can only have 4 numbers, because you can only enter 4 numbers, for 4 symbols even. So I was worried it was going to be 22,000, but it's not, because one of the zeros cancels. So it's 2,200. Beautiful. If A and B are the solutions, what is the value of the absolute value of A minus B? So I would just solve this out, personally. So I would just say you got absolute value equals a number. So it's either the positive version or the negative version. And I would just solve for both of those. So 2x equals 4. 2x equals negative 6. So x is negative 3 and x is 2. So those are the two solutions. So I'd plug those in and say, what's the absolute value of one of them minus the other one? Negative 3 minus 2 is negative 5. The absolute value of that is positive 5. And notice just for a second, like, how do you know which is A, which is B? It doesn't matter. If we would have done the absolute value of 2 minus negative 3, look how that's just 5. The absolute value of 5 is 5. So when you're doing absolute value stuff like that, it doesn't matter which one it is. And plus, if they don't tell you how to know which one is which, that means they have to be interchangeable anyway. All right, let's keep going. What is the value of 3x? So yeah, we're just going to solve for x. So I would think about adding the x to this side and subtracting the 5 to that side, just because there's no like sign switching divided by negatives. So that just gets us right up x equals 5. And so if x equals 5, that means that 3x is 15. Beautiful stuff. So next, we want 3x minus 2. So I think this one's kind of cool, because let me show you what I'm going to do here. So you could definitely just solve for x like normal and then find 3x minus 2. But check this out. What if we factored a 3 out of this? And there's our 3x minus 2 right there. And look how when we do the same thing over here, we factor out the 3 to get the 3x minus 2. Now those 3's are just going to cancel. So what we have is 2 3x minus 2 minus 4 equals 3 3x minus 2. And check this out. If we subtract 2 3x minus 2 from both sides, well, 3 3x minus 2's minus 2 3x minus 2's is just simply 1 3x minus 2. And now that we have that equals negative 4. So there we go. What is the value of 3x minus 2? Negative 4. We don't need to solve for x. Almost every time when they ask you for something like this, you don't need to solve for x. Of course, down here we did, but that's just because there was no shortcut. There's almost always a shortcut. So how about this one? Y equals mx, where m is a constant. Yeah, it's just one of those. It's a little different, but let's see. So if y is 17 when x is a, so we go 17 equals m a. What is the value of y when x is 2a? Well, to see that, that's just going to be multiplying both sides by 2. So 34 equals m times 2a. And see, that's sitting where the x was. So what is the y value? 34. What else could we have done there? Because that seems kind of fishy. I guess we could have solved for m and said that m equals 17 over a. So that means our full equation is y equals 17 over a times x. And now they say that x is 2a. So we'll say y equals 17 over a times 2a. And so those a's are canceling, and we're getting y equals 34. That feels better. But both methods were good. Now that's a repeat, right? There's a lot of repeats on here. We just divided everything by 2 and got that 2x plus 1 equals 2. Okay, here we go. So we got to solve for x. So don't just be dividing by 8. So many people think that, like, they divide by 8 and then they're like, oh, we just have x over here. But no, if we divide by 8, we have 1 over x. That x stays on the bottom. We're dividing by x. That's like fundamental. You can't just get rid of that. So that's not the method that I would take. I would multiply. Anytime I have fractions, I often just like to multiply, get rid of the fractions. We have 8 equals 160x. So then to get x by itself, we're dividing both sides by 160. And that might be tough to do in your head, but it's definitely less than 1, right? And there's only one answer choice that's less than 1. So we'll go with D. All right, last page. So the penicillin concentration in micrograms of the patient's bloodstream is given by that equation. P approximates the values within 10 microliters. What is the value of B rounded to the nearest tenth? All right, so we just got to solve for B. So, like, don't let all this stuff confuse you. Notice we really didn't read much of that. We're just looking for the equation and looking for what we're trying to do. And then we're going to use these values over here to plug in and solve for it. So generally you want to use the simplest value. So you might try that and do 0, 200. But notice that when we say to get 200 equals 200 times b to the 0 over 5, see how that's just b to the 0, which is 1, and so the b just totally goes away. So that's not actually a useful one to plug in. But then you just go to the next one, 5 and 152. So it tells us that when t equals 5, we should get 152. And that's super nice, because that's b to the 1, because it's b to the 5 over 5. So that means to get b, we just have to divide 152 over 200. And then they want it to the nearest tenth. So that probably means this is a calculator problem. But we don't even really need to. We can just round it. Call it 150 over 200. Cancel, cancel. That's 0.75, which means we need to round up to 0.8 to get it to the nearest tenth. Beautiful. All right. So let's see. Next 38 goes with this table. Looks like we'll probably do something similar. The number of international tourists arrived in Russia in 2012 was 13.5% greater than in 2011. The number of international was K million more in 2012 than 11. What is the value of K? Okay, so we're looking at Russia, as we all are right now. And I would calculate the 2011 number, because we know that the number of international tourists in 2012 is 13.5% greater than 2011. So I would say it's percentages. So don't try to go right to the answer. Just set up your percentage equation. We have that X, which is our 2011. And to get the 2012, it's 13.5% greater. So it's 1 plus 0.135. Remember, that's always how you do percent increase. And that's going to get us the 2012 number. Because we take 2011, increase it by 13.5%. That gets us the 2012 number. So what was the 2012 number? 24.7. And all these decimals, that means we're definitely going for the calculator. So I would just solve for x now. I would divide by 1.135. So 24.7 divided by 1.135. 21.8. Now, that's not the answer, because remember what they're looking for. They say the number of tourists arrived in Russia was 6 million more in 2012 than 2011. So we want the actual number increase. So we just have to do the 24.7 minus that. And I'd go to the calculator, but that's 2.9, right? 24.7 minus 21.8 is 2.9. So that should be the answer, except they do this too. They'll probably mark you wrong if you put 2.9 because they asked about the nearest integer. So that means the actual answer is 3. And notice it's not 3 million because they said k million. So k is 3, so it's already 3 million. Awesome. Oh, they gave us an easy one here. So let's just subtract z from both sides. Let's just subtract 1 from both sides. You get z equals -1. And then the last one, also pretty easy. So they give us numbers here. I guess we could plug in, like I've said to do. So let's see. If we plug in 0, that's no good, which makes sense because we're probably looking at one of those two numbers. So let's try -1. If we do -1, that's 1 minus 1. Oh, so the top gets 0. So that's not going to work. -1's not going to work. And if we plug in 1, same thing. Plus, if we plug in 1, we get 0 on the bottom. So that means it's got to be -3. But honestly, that's not even the fastest way to do it. I would not do that. I would say, because x squared minus 1, that's got to be like, bam, right in your brain right away. X squared minus 1 is x minus 1, x plus 1. And then once you do that, you cancel out the x minus 1s. You just get x plus 1 equals -2. So then when you subtract 1 from both sides, you just get -3. So in this case, it's easier to just solve it out just because it's so quick. And you should honestly see that as soon as you see this problem. You're like, oh, x squared minus 1, that's x plus 1, x minus 1. So that x minus 1 is going to cancel. So you can really just almost do this problem in your head, like before you even start it. And that is it for the solve for x section. So that took like an hour to do that whole section. But that's the longest section we got on here. That was a lot of problems. It's like 6 pages. But I hope y'all enjoyed that, or at least learned from it, and come back for the next one.